Go ahead and get started today if everything looks like we're good to go. Thumbs up, we good to go? All right. We will start then with the situation update. As of today, the State Health Department reports 6,229 positive cases of coronavirus and a total of 322 deaths. Confirmed and suspected COVID hospitalizations continue to drop, now at 158, the lowest number since early March. All around, the data appears encouraging. To put these figures into context, even with a marked increase in testing statewide, the percentage of positives is still below 4%, as compared to 10% in March. Oklahoma is now in the 8th day in May, and no new deaths reported. The health department reports that the state is on track for phase 3 of the governor's reopening plan to begin on June 1. All right, well, all of this information comes with the epidemiologist, and we have very good news to announce that our state interim epidemiologist, Dr. Erin Wendelboe, has been agreeable to be a part of this type of format with district leaders. And actually Phil Bacharach has set that up. We just did a preliminary call with him today. But I want to mention that next week's all district Zoom call will be on a different day in order to accommodate his schedule and not conflict with COSA's conference. So the new day for Dr. Wendelboe, the state epidemiologist, and our all district call will be Monday at 1 p.m. And I'm excited that we will have Oklahoma's interim epidemiologist to answer questions that you might have related to COVID-19 and what measures your district could take or should consider or not consider. Dr. Wendelboe and his team have worked with us in our proposed guidance for reopening and reentering next fall. His insights and expertise are truly valuable, and I hope that you'll join us Monday at 1 p.m. Now, I need to mention something that the FBI has asked us to mention to school district leaders, and it involves a scam. We are also needing to bring this matter to your attention because it causes a potential financial fraud that has been targeting Oklahoma teachers. So we hope that you will share this information with your teachers. So, you know, we will be sending you an email on this particular information later today, but I did want to cover a little bit about it. This was brought to our attention by the FBI's Oklahoma City Field Office. In recent weeks, the FBI has received complaints from teachers who were approached via email by unidentified individuals posing as school officials. These individuals asked teachers to purchase gift cards for students and to send the gift card verification codes in a return email. After the teachers inquired about reimbursements with the school secretary, they discovered the requests were invalid and noticed that the email sending address was spoofed to resemble a known school official's email, resulting in a financial loss to a teacher potentially. So the FBI is asking districts to forward email fraud indicators to teachers in your district and make them aware of any fraud activity as I just described. Okay, so look for that email and more details. Regarding our reopening plan and our guidance that is soon to be ready for you and that will be published on our website, we realize that you all are looking ahead to next fall and contingency plans for the reopening of the 2021 school year. OSDE anticipates its guidance will be available to you next week. Our hope and goal is before the COSA conference, because we do plan on leading a session about that guidance. So we are working around the clock to try to get all of this in good shape and ready for you. It will cover a range of topics, including school operations and management, health protocols, instruction, distance learning, college and career readiness, counseling, social and emotional learning, school personnel, and much more. I want to underscore that this is broad guidance and that these are recommendations rather than requirements. All of you have different circumstances and will want to use this framework as you develop what makes sense with the current data and your current layout and situation among your local communities. The fact is that COVID-19 crisis continues to evolve in terms of community spread, and we know about its spread and what preventive measures are most effective right now. But for this reason, guidance in late May for what will be coming in August is subject to change. However, I do want to mention something before I shift to question and answers. And one of the things that Dr. Wendelboe brought out in our conversation today was just that where we are right now is the very best it is going to be. Because once we do start reopening and there's more interaction, there's more opportunity for transmission, we will see cases rise. So whatever your risk today or your perceived risk within your community, this is as good as it's going to get. I think there's a question about, is it going to continue to improve as we reach into the fall? And the answer to that is likely no. It's actually going to return to higher numbers, and yet it is something that we can safely say it's not going to continue to get better. What we hope is that we can keep things stable. And that was something that with contact tracing, they will have greater data and information about how the virus and immunities are building within a community. So all of that information is important as we go forward, but I do think that that is important to think about as we plan for the future. All right, so at this time, let me get back to the chat. And I appreciate any of you to toss your questions in that you have. Phil Bacharach is going to facilitate some of these questions today. Just a reminder, we do have a board meeting tomorrow. You're all invited to be a part of that if you want to log in. It'll be available to the public through Facebook. So let's see, do we have any questions to start with, Phil?
Yes, Superintendent, we do have a question regarding graduation, and with phase 3 about to begin, if there is the lifting of a ceiling on the number of graduation attendees.
Okay, very good. Good question. And I would say after our conversation, really setting the stage with our epidemiologist, because it is a time of being in phase 3, that doesn't mean that safeguards should be discarded. We really need to continue with social distancing, number one, and the, lowering the risk for transmission. So whatever your plans are, we are not back to normal, even though there is a all clear in terms of executive orders about restricting movement. Keep that in mind, that as you make those plans, there will be contact tracing. We would hate for all of that to come back to a graduation ceremony, and we will be able to know those kinds of points of origination and how that might translate later in your own school and community. So please continue to be safe and smart about social distancing as you make those plans.
Superintendent, there is a question looking forward to fall if districts do have the ability to make their own modified schedule.
Certainly. Districts are open to making a flexible schedule, and if we will be addressing some of this in the guidance that will be available to you next week. But we want very much for you to be thinking about different scenarios, different kinds of flexibility that might be needed. Maybe you begin, the school year with a traditional schedule, and that's plan A, but we do encourage that you have a plan B in place if that is needed. The other thing that you may want to consider is how, and I think part of how you think about planning and schedules has a strong correlation with the layout of your campus and your class sizes. We've heard even a recommendation. I don't know how likely or even plausible this might be, but rearranging classes, even the use of mobile temporary units like mobile trailers, where there's a lot of overcrowding, that is a possibility as well.
Superintendent is looking ahead again with certainly distance learning. One of the questions is regarding if districts are able to proceed with finding their own methods on internet access, specifically for kids with low socioeconomic households, or if the state is negotiating on any sort of possible providers.
Well, we have continued to put our foot down, pedal to the metal, and haven't let up on that. It will require some coordination with other government entities. We are in continued meetings with both business providers as well as with the governor's office, working toward that end, but I don't have an answer for you today. But I would hesitate to say don't provide. What we would be looking at is a way to get reduced rates. And that would be something that to keep in mind regarding reduced rates for hotspots. That's one of the areas we're looking at. We're also exploring what we can do with data casting, which uses our TV towers through OETA. And there is a receiver in the home that actually stores the data, and you can even do Zoom calls with it, and it feels like the internet. These are still in early stages. South Carolina is the only state piloting this right now. We are preparing to do this with Oklahoma for those who do not have any way to have internet right now, where content can download and also upload back. So there's some promising things. I wish I had all of it ironed out for you today. I just don't.
Going back to the whole issue of schedules, there was a question about if there are flex schedules, how districts would be expected to meet the requirements on days or hours.
Sure. And what we have said is that you can look to as a model for language or procedures with the way other, like our statewide virtual rules are for virtual schools. Or you can pass a policy that modifies that. That is something that it fits your community. But if Brad is on the call, and I hesitate to see if he is or isn't, because I know he's preparing for our board meeting, is there anything that you would like to mention to that question?
Sure.
Okay.
My connection was having trouble at the beginning, so I'm sorry if I'm repeating anything, but as far as instructional days and hours and how those might be met, again, the use of a virtual program to meet those instructional days is something that can definitely count. Certainly encourage districts to have the policies and the programs in place as to when those can be utilized, how they will be utilized, how you measure attendance, and there are certain parameters that we've put out in the FAQs that would also be included in the next round of guidance. Just a very brief mention to something that's on the agenda tomorrow, and that is the ability, the complete option for a district to utilize Saturday as an instructional day, whether that's for professional development, whether that's for instruction via virtual learning, or otherwise. It is just an option. Right now, statute requires that districts apply on an individual basis to have those days count, and this would just be a blanket flexibility that's afforded the districts.
Okay, very good. So please dig into the guidance when it comes to speak to some more particulars.
Some questions about that guidance, specifically with regard to health protocols. There was a question if that will cover how often to disinfect or clean surfaces. Also, along those lines, there was a question about social distancing and with the edict of being 6 feet apart, if that is anticipated to be a requirement come August.
Oh, that's a really good question, especially using that kind of term about requirement or edict and 6 feet apart. I think it's really important to think about all of this as layers of protection, not one hard, fast rule about any of this. CDC guidance is just that, it is guidance, and that it must be acceptable for the local community and local context. It also needs to be practical, and then I've forgotten the third one, so I'll think of it in a second. Feasible. And so feasible, practical, and acceptable in the local context. There are going to be situations, obviously, where a 6 foot distancing is just impractical. So that is not being recommended. What is then being recommended is that you layer other protections to mitigate what you cannot do. I'm going to take, for example, driver's ed. You're in a car and not many cars are going to seat you 6 feet apart, but you can have windows rolled down. We know that in a vehicle like a bus, having windows down is going to actually really improve the air quality and reduce transmission. And that same kind of mitigation factor can be added in a vehicle with driver's ed. If you are in a bus, it's very unlikely you're going to be able to be 6 feet apart at the start of the bus route when kids are going home, because they're going to be packed in. So this is a situation where masks really matter. And one of the things that was underscored today is how we really do need to think about masks as a staple and something that we do encourage and insist, or in your own district require, that faculty and students wear. But it's also understood that, again, down to some of our lower level aged students, it could become impractical. So then you have to think about other factors and how we use more hand washing, how we try to use masks where some can wear them, great. But it is a part of building a culture that is thinking of others and also thinking more about layering those safeguards. Just like when we drive a car, we layer safeguards that fit the scenario. There's a difference in how we layer safeguards with race car drivers who are going at high rates of speed, wearing helmets and fire retardant gear, and how we drive with an infant in a special car seat to fit the scenario or the people. But we do need to layer those, from seat belts to the speed we go that is appropriate for weather or road conditions. And that also includes the safety of anti-lock brakes, etc., guardrails on the roads. So all of those are going to play a factor. So please don't get hung up on just one and doing a 6 foot measurement as if 5.5 feet reduces the risk completely and 7 feet means you're going to get COVID. It's just meant to be a easy guideline to try to fit into a framework of lowering the risk within schools.
Along those lines, will there be requirements or any guidance regarding the ability to use cafeterias for breakfast and lunch?
Yes. Again, keeping in mind that a lot of times school cafeterias are big open spaces, which actually is good. We also know that there is guidance about keeping a cohort of students together and not mixing all through the school, where I think as you get older, middle school and high school, there is more mixing. There's less of that in elementary. I think that that will be easier to manage in elementary than in high school. And it is a consideration to think through, keeping kids in areas as cohorts as much as possible where practical. That may not be practical, but in a high school, you can wear masks and you can expect students to be mature. And I know that there's a lot of you that are rolling your eyes right now, but there is a likelihood that they can understand the need for a mask. And again, it's about that layering. So another example that the CDC gave us on last week's call was that it's a little bit like the way you think about Swiss cheese, if you will, and go with me for just a moment. When you slice into Swiss cheese, each slice has holes, but as you layer one slice on top of the other, it begins to cover those holes. And when you look at that, then it is all covered. So think in terms of what can you add when you can't have one of these very commonly stated safeguards in place. Again, layering is the best. We are reducing risk. To take it to a place of zero risk means to close schools. We don't want to do that, and we don't believe that that will be necessary. I did see a question in there about 2 weeks after Christmas break, and that's an interesting thing to consider, but that has not been something that we have discussed yet.
And actually there were a couple of questions about, I guess, some rumors circulating that there would be a uniform start date, possibly after Labor Day. Carolyn did address it in chat, but I know not everyone can read chat. So what is the story on that?
Yeah, there is no uniform start date. And you're right, that was a rumor. Anytime you would take a snapshot in time of conversations that develop between school district superintendents, you could have a whole host of rumors. But no, I think certainly there will be some schools that have neighboring schools very close by that may share a common start date, but that's up to them.
Going back to the whole issues of schedules, Superintendent, with regard to the possibility of some students being in school for a couple of days out of the week and then virtual for the remainder of that time, and that basically being rotated for students. The question was, I guess, some skepticism on if that is really permissible and how they would be able to code that.
Yes, it is permissible, and they will be able to count attendance based on their attendance policy. Again, Brad, I'll ask you to restate how to do that.
I think you said that exactly right there. It is permissible. Those are going to be determined according to the district's attendance policies that they will have in place for the particular program that they have being offered and utilized on those given days, whether that's full virtual learning, whether that's packets, a combination of both. Those are going to be controlled just as they would with on-site as far as the attendance policies. And so strongly encourage districts to have those policies in place, and if not, begin looking at what might be in place for those policies, and we're all happy to help as we can there.
Very good, thank you. I saw another driver's ed question, and yes, you can go to the guidance. Yes, driver's ed driving portion can start in June.
Questions going back to masks, and obviously the use of masks has been divisive in some communities. Any thoughts, suggestions on the possibility of parents not wanting their kids to wear masks, or some people believe it's just not healthy to wear masks, or along those lines?
I have not heard about it being unhealthy to wear a mask. I would think hospitals and physicians and epidemiologists are aware of what is healthy, what is not. And we have a lot of asthma in our family, and I've not heard that. Districts could set their own policies. And let me just ask Brad, is there anything that would like prohibit a district from stating all staff will wear a mask, or students above this age are required, or anything along that? Or is that I'm just not sure what, I haven't thought about that answer.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the way you answered it is right. Again, it's going to be determined by a district policy. And so I see a question pop up in the chat here about, do we need to amend our dress code policy? Quite possibly, depending on what the best determination for your local district is going to be. There are certainly recommendations out there. There are screening procedures out there. There are recommendations, but each district will be able to determine that within the needs of their particular community.
And also someone is pointing out that actually that there may be something in the CDC about wearing masks with asthma. Boy, if someone has asthma and they can't wear a mask, that
Superintendent, for what is worth, in the CDC guidance, if I recall, I mean, there are recommendations about people not wearing a mask if they are unable to really successfully take it, put it on or take it off. Certainly not children under 2. I mean, there's some restrictions. I don't remember anything specifically with regard to asthma.
We'll add that to our list for the our health department questions.
And Superintendent, it slipped my mind in my comment just a moment ago, but we do encourage common sense accommodations for medical conditions or otherwise. So those should be taken into account, of course.
Yes.
A number of questions about your thoughts with regard to the OSSAA decision from, I guess, was last week or 2 weeks ago?
Yes, I think it was last week. Or was it this week? I don't know.
Days run into each other.
Yes, they do. Well, I think the answer is very simple, that those were, and I learned from Superintendent McDaniel in Oklahoma City, they were developed to be recommendations. I don't think that it was the intention anyway to have strict mandates all across the board, but I don't know. I'm not a part of that. That is a separate private membership group. But I do think that what is important is thoughtful consideration about how we move into each aspect of reopening school starting this summer, with all of the different activities that are going to be available or not available for our students. And it looks to me, from what I understand, that this is now left to be a district by district decision of the membership. And I do think that there's lots of smart, very thoughtful ideas that are in that. I did hear that one school that's small that was in full support of layering a lot of safeguards found an aspect of it to be just untenable due to finance. So then work around it, you know? And I think that the main point of all this effort and work is that everyone is trying to provide guidance that will help each individual school district think through how to keep their staff and students safer than if there were no guidance at all. And I appreciate all those who worked so hard to put that together. And I think it also just is a a point to highlight how different many of our schools are. And there's just lots of different opinions about how to keep kids safe. We do believe that it is important that we have safeguards as we go into the summer and into the fall. And after our conversation today, I really do think that it is not getting better, because more and more people will be mixing. And we know that the likelihood of having immunities all throughout our state or in the country is just not going to instantly happen. So we will be at risk for a while. We'll know more with contact tracing, but right now we really are not able to say that things will get better with each month that goes on. So keep that in mind. I think there was a little bit of a sense that things look okay so far, but we really don't have any assurance or confidence that things will improve regard to the risk. It will either be the same or it will be worse.
Superintendent, do you know at this point if there have been any contact tracing of COVID cases that do go back to school activities, whether that be graduation or prom or anything along those lines?
Not yet. And I think it would be too early to actually have that data. That's all very, very early.
Is certainly a situation that a number of schools will see themselves in the fall. If you do have parents refusing to send their child to school, concerned about health, what would our guidance be in terms of if virtual instruction would then be
Yes.
required?
Yes. So I think that that's a whole nother aspect that you're dealing with. And we recognize no matter what the says, there will be some who say there is no risk, and there are others who are very, very fearful. And we know that there are different reasons for fear. And that fear may be very much related to family members that are undergoing treatment that lowers their immune system. We don't know all of those details, nor do school people. But for those children whose parents say, no way, I cannot allow my child to go to school, that is a scenario we had hoped our districts would be addressing so that they are still part of their school community, but able to do distance learning until there is a time where there's confidence to be back in school. Of course, we want our students to be safe and secure and healthy at school, and we want that for our staff, but we recognize that that is not going to be the case for everyone. Everyone has a different level of risk, and we respect the fact that there will be families that are absolutely unwilling, and we have to find ways to accommodate that.
Superintendent, another question we've had is with regard to summer reading academies, and if schools can move forward with those academies in June.
And hey, by the way, I do not think, okay, I'm sorry, I'm looking at something in the chat right now. I do not think that it is optimal for families that I was just describing to have to enroll in a whole nother school. The whole goal here is during a temporary time that they are able to stay with and keep those relationships intact with their home community, with their home school. So I hope that districts, and from everything that I see, districts are working to be able to provide distance learning as an option for families where that is appropriate, just like they would have other families with other needs be it special education or English learners, where they're adapting to meet those needs.
Another question that likely can be sent to Brad just to help keep him on his toes. There was a question with regard to legal liability on the part of districts in which a COVID case might stem from a school, what the liabilities or responsibilities are in that case.
Thanks, Phil. Definitely need to keep on the toes. So I think there are several bills that made their way through the legislature and will become law that provide exemptions. One exempts businesses from tort liability. Political subdivisions, which school districts are, currently have exemptions under the Governmental Tort Claims Act, and perhaps not as overall coverage as an ideal world would encompass. I think there are several arguments within the Governmental Tort Claims Act that would provide exemptions or claims of exemptions from any liability. Did that help answer the question, Phil?
It did. I say it did. Superintendent,
Yeah.
Also with regard to, there was a question, I don't know if we actually have this, but with regard to phase 3, the governor's reopening plan, if we have heard anything on when further details will be unveiled on that. I'm assuming it has to be in relatively short order since June 1 is the change date for that.
Yes. And I think that as early as, or as late as today's update that we receive every morning at 9:30 on the health conditions and various stats that are included in that. Even I think one on Saturday said that it looks like we are on track for that opening. So I would not anticipate anything changing. That date is, I expect that we will move into phase 3. So if you're asking me if I've heard any rumors about it, the rumor would be there are no rumors. It's just on track. And in terms of the details, then that would be something that, Carolyn, I think I saw you comment that you've checked the Department of Commerce website and don't see any details yet. Is that right?
Correct. It still, as of this morning, the website and the plan still say that additional details will be released for phase 3. So we haven't heard the specifics on that.
Okay.
Along the lines of students and concerns about that their parents might have with regard to sending them back to school, a number of districts have questions regarding teachers who may be reluctant to come back for health issues or just not feeling comfortable with that. Is there guidance that OSDE would have with regard to that?
Well, we know this is really a challenge. It's going to be a balance between, obviously, we have people that have signed a contract and they are to fill a role. If there is a way for them to fulfill that role in a way that protects them by staying home or being virtual, perhaps that is a way. I don't know that, you know, if this continues for a very long time, how someone is able to fulfill that contract as a teacher in school if they're not in school. I do think that we have heard from national organizations that there are some states that are looking at encouraging districts to do like an early buyout for retirement, or but I just don't think that we have those kinds of means in Oklahoma. These are going to boil down to individual decisions by that employee, but I don't have additional things to add. Maybe someone else on my team does. And I would say consult with your attorney, but I don't know if we have anything to add.
Yeah, I think consulting with legal counsel, human resources, if you have that particular office in the district, paying attention to updates from the governor's plan, any extension of the executive orders, particularly with individuals who may be over 65. And again, always fall back on what does the district policy provide, with making accommodations, just as we were suggesting earlier about the masks and the screening procedures, and compelling individuals to come on site. I think the guidance that we will be putting out soon addresses the importance of having these leadership plans and discussions in advance. And a part of that would be developing an adaptive staff model so that you're able to adapt and overcome any disruptions, accommodations, and things along those lines. So it will be spelled out in more detail, but for now, I think that's the general plan.
Well, and I think someone asked, you know, is it possible for someone over 65 to please be able to come back after June 1? And of course, we will be waiting to see what it says in the governor's phase 3 guidance. But I would not expect that there would be a limitation. I don't know that. If people are willing, I think that's very different.
Superintendent, in the eventuality of schedules where there would be days for virtual instruction or distance learning instruction, how would that work with regard to child nutrition? Would schools be able to do what we did over the spring in terms of feeding kids? I know this is probably for Ms. Weber.
Yeah. Yes, go ahead, Jennifer, and share with us. We are pursuing and have a number of waivers that will last either into the summer or expire August 30th, or I'm going to let you, though, let folks know we're doing everything we can to continue as much of those waivers as we can. But Jennifer, could you speak specifically to points of interest that you can anticipate?
Sure. Like you stated, currently nationwide waivers are in place through August 31st, except for meal patterns. It is only till July 31st at this point. And Secretary of Agriculture Sonny Perdue is allowed to extend those into September if need be. But once September is over, that's as long as he can extend them according to the CARES Act and some legislation that was put in there, giving him that flexibility. At that point, those nationwide waivers will come to an end if somehow the powers that be don't step in to extend them longer than that. It has to be someone other than Secretary of Agriculture Sonny Perdue. If that does not get extended, we will be applying for some state waivers. There would have to be a state waiver issued for each individual item, much like now, a non-congregate feeding, many state waivers. So they're wanting us to just stick with the nationwide waivers right now, and they are making plans for the school year. I don't think they're being quite as proactive as we are here in Oklahoma in getting a plan set up. I don't want to sound tacky, but sometimes they do things after the fact. And so we are trying to be proactive on that. But while these nationwide waivers are in place, we are to keep using those. And then I am going to work towards ensuring that I can step in with some state waivers if need be.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thanks for your great work and team.
Thank you.
Superintendent, some questions rather with regard to summer leagues and if school facilities can be utilized for those at this point.
Yeah, and that will be a district decision whether or not that can be, you know, on their campus or not.
There was a question with regard to Edmentum and specifically with regard to Exact Path. If that is going to be an acceptable benchmark for OSDE, if so, when trainings might occur, when that might be available to schools.
Okay, there's two parts in that question I'm not quite sure about, so maybe someone can clarify that wrote it. When you said an acceptable benchmark, I'm not sure what that means, because I can think of that relating to RSA, and it would not have any connection to one of those benchmarks that are approved for RSA. Other than that, did someone write in the chat any update to that?
Not that I have seen.
Okay. Brad?
Yeah. Yes, the question is about RSA.
Okay, no.
Okay.
No. It has to include, your RSA screener must be one of the approved vendors for the purpose of RSA.
Just because I don't want Carolyn to think that she can't answer questions and she's not doing the moderating. There was a question about the budget for next year. If there have been conversations with the legislators about what it's going to look like for next fiscal year. I didn't know if that might be too early to for speculation at this point.
Sure. I'm not sure if the question is in regard to the year that we are about to enter, FY21, or the year following, what the legislature might do next session for FY22. I think that there are conflicting, specifically for FY22, there are kind of conflicting opinions about what may happen economically. The governor has continued to feel like the economy may not have, we may not have seen the full effect from the economic downturn, and that will continue to be played out in FY22, in which case it would be likely that more cuts would be coming in FY22. On the other hand, legislative leadership has said that they believe that the economy will bounce back more quickly. And in fact, they have said publicly that they're hopeful that that the legislature might in fact be able to return next session and possibly put additional funds into the FY21 budget. So I think just right now, everyone is trying to read the tea leaves, if you will, and no one really knows quite what is going to happen until the economy really gets back on its feet. So I don't know that we can provide any more specifics other than that.
With speaking of reading tea leaves, it might be too early to tell Superintendent, but there was a question if there is any sort of idea on how the school report cards for next year might be modified in light of COVID-19, or if there would be modifications.
Yes, I think I even saw that question come through, and it was for the 2021 school year. And so that again will very much depend on what happens in the school year. Obviously, our focus right now would be that we can anticipate there is an issue would be with chronic absenteeism. The last thing we want to do is encourage people to be in school when they should not be in school. And safety is always going to take priority over a particular indicator that we would measure during normal times. But that is something that is part of a national conversation that I believe there are 37 of the 50-some states and provinces that already use chronic absenteeism to meet the federal requirement of a non-academic indicator. And so we will be solving that with a lot of other states to meet federal requirement. So please just know what our position is, and there are ways to work around that. But do not expect a school report card this fall.
Is there going to be any uniformity in guidance about cases, well, instances in which there is a positive COVID-19 case on whether that be from a student or staff member, if there are uniform procedures that will be provided for schools?
So the answer to that is yes. We will have very clear guidance and steps in the return and reopen plan next week. Part of that will connect the school with their local health department or with the state if their local health department is not swift enough to answer. But we do have recommendations in there with more of a collaborative. This is all going to be done with other other entities as well. However, we want districts positioned to be able to make that call and make the decision about whether or not to close a class or a pod for a day after someone tests positive. Those pieces are being addressed and will be something that we did discuss today with our internal call with the state epidemiologist, and we expect that you'll want to ask those kinds of questions and hear his answer on our call Monday at 1.
Finally, I suspect time for one more question with regard to CARES Act funding. If there's any details about additional CARES Act funding along those lines. Also a question if there's a timeline on when districts will be able to hear more about the incentives grants that will be provided.
Yes, and we are really eager to have all of that finalized. We do have a proposed idea of how we want to structure the rubric and opportunity for the particular State Department of Education portion of incentive grants and competitive grants. So this is going to be something that the reason we haven't described the full plan yet is we are still doing everything we can to grow the amount a little bit, and some of the decisions of how our funds will be divided are still in flux, and we're trying to hammer out a few more details before we can be precise with the number. But we believe that we will be putting forward some attractive amounts for consideration and for you to apply for. The other thing is, I did see someone asking a question, and I understand the need for clarity around Edmentum or other content management systems. And we do have state rates available right now. We have talked about this from time to time, and we are pursuing and don't have it completed yet, so it's really premature, but it is our desire to have a tool that is math and reading focused, diagnostic tool that starts, and it's not when we say diagnostic, it's diagnostic in the way it begins, but it is instruction that is personalized to close the gaps in learning for a student from where they are today and where they need to be by the end of the school year. And that would be free to all districts because we would like to have a state purchase and use the State Department set aside funds to do this at a deeply discounted rate if we do that for the whole state. So please know that is our plan. But because we are not at a place where that's finalized, we can't just talk about it as if it is final. But we want you to know that's my desire. That's our desire. And then we would love you to be able to take advantage of state rates with kind of a tiered approach where you can add to or use this if in classrooms with physical attendance and the ability for teachers to have virtual differentiation and grouping, but that it also can help with a seamless transition into home if distance learning is something that is called on as a response to a need in a community or in a school. So just know that's coming, and we are doing, we expected to already have that completed by today. It's not happened yet. It's not completed yet, but that's the plan.
Superintendent, I guess it is time to wrap up. I just do want to reiterate that with next week's phone call, it will be at 1 o'clock on June 1, and we will be sending out the Zoom information for that.
Very good. Thank you very much, Bill, and others on our team today. Also, we will again have a deeper dive into this with we've been invited to present at the COSA conference, so there'll be a session to try to answer some questions that you may have specific to the actual plan. So that's coming next week as well. Thank you so much. And we'll review the questions that remain unanswered and add some of those to our FAQs where we haven't already answered those things. So we appreciate you very much. And we know there's just great work ahead. You all are up to the task, and I have great confidence in your leadership. So thank you so much. Take care.